Me in the K-12 system where I worked for a long time, and Mark was critiquing it at post-secondary, and I was very impressed. But since then I've been even more impressed with Mark, with knowing what he's done around homelessness in Regina, and running for a political party that I sometimes do vote for. Not conservative. But I also want to say the dean here in the Faculty of Ed, James McNinch, I've never been, I mean, he's at the upper echelon of progressive deans in Canada, and I've met most of the deans. Thank you, Mark and Patrick, for organizing this, and everybody. So anyway, I also want to say that to be here with Michael Apple is great for me. With my master's thesis, I used ideology and curriculum, and with my PhD dissertation, the book that Michael wrote, I think it was in 1980, right? 79.
When I was a child.
Yeah. And just the whole idea that there's power embedded in the curriculum, and that just, you know, removed the blinders for me, and set me off on a career of deconstructing hegemonic discourses. So anyway, thank you. And one other thing I want to say, I was teaching a grad course this summer in Saskatoon, and there were 16 people. All of them were school teachers, and as we all know here, they're negotiating right now with the contract. And one of the articles that we had, one of the readings was one that you wrote in probably '89, but maybe off by a year or two. And it was on why teachers get kicked around as, you know, it's seen as a feminine profession, and you talked about the term intensification of teaching. Well, these 16 teachers who, for the most part, I'd say 13 of them were kind of apolitical in terms of their consciousness anyway, they came alive with your article and were so upset with the Sask Party treating teachers that way. You know, so it was the perfect timing of your reading and them negotiating. It was the first job action ever by the STF, I think, in this province, right? And I'm from BC, and we will do job action there, and I'm a proud member of the BCTF for 20 years, and so anyway, I'm glad to see some. I like it when teachers dig in and say enough of kicking us around. We're going to fight back. Okay, anyway, a couple of points I want to make, and it was all just based on Michael's talk this afternoon, just some comments here. First one, I just want to talk about neoliberalism for a second, because the first time I heard this term was like around 1993, and I saw a poster about some speakers in Vancouver at SFU were going to talk about neoliberalism in South America, kind of in a negative way. And I didn't know what the term meant, and I thought, okay, neoliberalism, hey, it's got to be better than the military dictatorships they've had down there, so what's the problem? I didn't understand. At the time, I thought neoliberalism meant some kind of like a hyper-liberal society. I didn't realize, you know, that like really going to go for gay rights and really going to go for this. I didn't realize that really neoliberalism meant to liberalize the movement of money, deregulate. And we all see that with the subprime mortgage, you know, the problems that can happen when you deregulate industry. But there are some other traits about it. Curbing workers' rights, which we've seen where Michael lives now in Wisconsin. We've seen what's happened there with Scott Walker and the Tea Party governor that they have there. Union busting, I guess. There's also the privatizing of the commons. And you talked about that this afternoon with the voucher schools and this way of undermining public education so that people send their kids to private schools and tax dollars go to private schools, and it really is a privatizing of the commons, and we see it up here with healthcare too. And by the way, I moved from BC to here because because Tommy Douglas. I actually did vote for the guy as the greatest Canadian, and I like universal public healthcare. But also the free trade. Now this is an interesting one, where free trade is, you know, when we were teaching about it in the 80s, everyone's saying we got to be more competitive and this economically competitive. Sure, but if you don't do it in terms of a class-based analysis where shareholders may benefit when you do free trade with a third world country, but you know, the workers don't, unless we do free trade with Sweden. But we never hear about that, right? We never do. What did we just do? Honduras or Guatemala a month ago? Colombia, but also
the Central America.
And either Honduras or I know it's always these kinds of countries. So, but that's part of what's going on with neoliberalism. And the last one is the focus on the individual, that we're not supposed to belong to any social groups, and that's part of this too. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. One of the things that was quite interesting with what you talked about, Michael, was the systemic violence. You brought up Pierre Bourdieu's concept there, and the neoconservative desire for a common curriculum in our high schools. And you mentioned that when that happens in a diverse society, lots of groups are left out, and there's no question about that. One of the things when I was studying the BC curriculum, the evolution of the social studies curriculum in BC, they used to have units on what taxes are used for. All the way up until 1968, there was a unit that all the students needed to know. I think that's a great unit to have. It was taken out, and now we've got this tax cut mania that's getting in the way of K-12 and universal health care, and the universities themselves are now on a business model. So, and another one that was in there was the history of trade unions and cooperatives. That was a unit in the high school curriculum back then. So they had a class oriented social studies curriculum. That's all gone now, and in some ways the curriculum has improved around Aboriginal issues and gender issues, but in terms of the real threat to economic hegemony, class consciousness, that's gone out of the curriculum completely. So working class kids are not represented, and so in terms of the Bourdieu symbolic violence, that's something we don't talk about much. We do talk a lot about race and gender, but not enough about class. So anyway, and over to the neoliberal focus on the individual. Arizona, some of you may know that in May 2010, their Governor Jan Brewer passed, well, two controversial pieces of legislation, one kind of profiling Latino and Latina people or Hispanic people in Arizona. But the second one has to do with schools. Here in Canada, well, we have Native Studies and First Nation Studies 12 in BC, and multicultural education, for all its flaws, do we want to get rid of it? No, we don't. But Arizona passed legislation getting rid of ethnic studies there. Why? Because the argument for those who were successful in getting rid of it said it just makes minority students get angry at white people. So let's just forget about this. For one thing, that does acknowledge the effects of good teaching, that it can have some positive effects, But it was, that was what Jan Brewer said, that we don't want students always angry at white people, so let's get rid of this. And they banned it. And a teacher can get fired if they teach ethnic studies, which would be Hispanic studies, African American studies, you don't use the term First Nation studies, but Native American studies, right, all ended with Arizona. Now, if you think some of these issues won't come to Canada, I do want to say, after the Wisconsin thing where the Tea Party guy says, vote for me, it'll be tax cuts, the people go for it, and then he immediately says, we're going to curb the collective bargaining rights of teachers and nurses. That was horrible, but some of you may know John Gormley up here, a talk radio show guy. He's like Saskatchewan's answer to Rush Limbaugh, Michael. And anyway, I've never listened to the guy, but my student teachers, when this happened in Wisconsin, said, oh, did you hear the Gormley show? I said, no, I didn't. Well, he said he approved of how the Wisconsin government treated, and you're nodding because you must have heard that show.
No, I know John Gormley.
Oh, okay.
We were following the negotiations for teachers in the province and everything. That's what that came up.
I see. And my student teachers, pre-service teachers said, every single caller said, yes, Saskatchewan should do the same to the teachers of
Comments in the
Saskatchewan.
papers were like that to some extent.
Right, and I'm thinking some of these guys are paid by SAS Party people. I do feel that. I don't know. I forgive me, but I don't think that they're totally honest, and that's not just because of Brian Mulroney. Why I think that conservatives aren't always honest. But at any rate, so I do want to say this focus on the individual and what can happen in the U.S. It's a harbinger of what can happen up here shortly thereafter. Now, Michael made an excellent point this afternoon. 2 minutes? Okay, thanks. Neoliberals need neoconservatives. Well, I just want to talk about besides neoconservatism being this thing about patriotism and a strong military to defend their way of life, in May 2nd, when we did elect that federal Harper government, Harper had 4 main planks: corporate tax cuts, new prisons, Stealth jets, very expensive, and you may remember there was some controversy around the price of these jets. Like he was saying it was about a quarter of what the Pentagon actually said they were charging him.
And
I-
when the wings get wet, you can see them, by the way.
Yeah.
So they don't
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm thinking that might be a good idea. And unregistered guns. So he ran on corporate tax cuts, prisons, jets, and guns. Now, if that's not a fear-based kind of agenda, now, let's be honest, he got 39%, so 61% of voters went for one of the four other parties, which is kind of a problem. Not that I want to merge a party, but anyway, that's just something that needs to be said. Last point I want to make is on the language hijackers. You talked a little bit about that around democracy today, Michael. And, you know, we used to think of in social studies citizenship being a very important word. You know, we got to get rid of this notion of consumer, and people got to know about citizenship and citizenship rights. But Stephen Harper, after being a Reform MP and before he became the head of the Conservative Party, he headed an organization that some of you may know, right? The
Canadian Taxpayers
National Pardon?
Citizens Coalition.
Yeah,
That,
National
yeah.
Citizens Coalition. So they were taking that word away right then. And even the term social justice, which a lot of people in here adhere to, there is a group, Canadian Families for Social Justice, who are bent on stopping gay marriage. So they take the term social justice and use it for their own, you know, right-wing ends. So anyway, so what can we do about this? Because I got about 32 seconds, Mark? Okay, for one thing, one of the things Michael wrote in Ideology and Curriculum Teaching is a political act. And we all know that, even for the teachers that say, hey, I don't want to be political, I just follow the curriculum. And I've had teachers say that to me in my own research. It is a political act. What can we do about this? But for me, it really does come down to, in social studies, we really do need critical media literacy. Not just media literacy, not just product placement and, you know, how they use women as sex objects to sell products. Of course, that's important. But I just want to know, how come we have a conservative prime minister while the Americans have Obama? You know, and like Bush is gone. Harper was connected to Bush. How did this happen? I do feel that the National Post and the Globe and Mail, to almost as strong an extent, have something to do with this. I really feel we need to do this and step it up. And you know, a lot of people they think corporate media is objective. They don't understand corporate media, corporate interests, and this is a no-brainer. But anyway, that's all I want to say. And Michael Apple has had a lot to do with informing me on the way I see education in the world. Thank you.
So, thank you. My voice is going, I'm sorry, I'll try. I have arthritis and my throat starts to swell at the end of the day, so it's not just that I'm over-talked or talked out, it's also the swelling. You're not supposed to say, oh. Okay, anyway. I agree with everything that Paul said. It's actually, so I want to talk a bit about the right that goes beyond neoliberalism. Because one of the arguments I want to make is we spend too much time talking about neoliberalism. That's not the only group. So when you talk about neoconservatives, it seems to me they are absolutely central to this project. And I want to make an outlandish claim. If you want to understand how to interrupt dominance, study what they do. The best social teachers I have ever seen are the right. There is no evidence to support their claims. None whatsoever. Yeah, I mean, how could a nation vote for your prime minister? Everybody knows it's wrong. What I talked about earlier, that people, the right is brilliant about reaching into people's understanding and attaching themselves to it. That's exactly what they do. So part of the argument I want to make is, and I don't mean this cynically, we spend so much time in this field called critical pedagogy being rhetorical and then distancing ourselves from real teachers that's been turned into simply an academic field. When if you look on the ground, so to speak, you find that there are people doing some interruptive stuff that's crucial. That's not part of our democratic schools. But also, we have to study the right. It's absolutely central. So your point, for instance, about media work becomes crucial. So let me give an example of a bizarre thing. This AERA organization, it's 13, 14,000 sort of researchers who get 12 minutes to tell the story of their lives, met in New York about 3 years ago, and there was a billboard in Times Square that was probably about 23 stories high, brought to you by the Cook brothers, the same folks who are just this, billionaires, and the same folks who brought you the bell curve, and it's all about race, etc. Had this billboard that simply said, $10,000 reward if you identify the worst teacher in your school. Now, the fact that I'm actually talking about that here says that we are now operating on the terrain of the right. So they are absolutely brilliant in using popular culture, media, outlandish tricks. There's a billboard that you cannot ignore, and you've got every child with every parent doing the Times Square tourist routine. Look how clean it is now because the police are kicking out all the people of color. But it's also this thing about how brilliant they are in using the media. Now, one of the things I remember, I spent a lot of time working in Brazil with Paulo Freire. When he was made Secretary of Education in Sao Paulo, he brought in all these male militants to do critical pedagogy. And they had about as much respect for teachers as Scott Walker does. Okay? So these were men looking at women's work saying, we can tell you what to do, whatever you're doing is wrong. And I was brought in to mediate this stuff. I've been president of the Teachers Union in New Jersey, and my task was to say, don't do this. You're going to lose all the teachers, and you cannot do critical stuff if you don't have teachers on your side. And one of the things that the right has done brilliantly is actually to listen to power, which is talk about teachers, control the media about how teachers are thought about. And the more you can demonize teachers, the better you will be. Okay? I want to spend some time talking about a project that goes further about your thing about learning about popular culture. We tend to put this on our teachers and our faculty members, saying, well, we have to teach critical media literacy, let's get a curricular area on that. I agree with that, but I think that that is less important right now than some other stuff. We've engaged in the US and now in Brazil in what is called the Critical Media Project, where we have studied what the right does and how it convinces people. And we've said one of the things they do is to colonize the space of the media in brilliant ways. So in a time when people's work is individuated, when there's no sociality, capitalism will destroy communities unless it can sell them. Right? So if you can have the working museum that tourists can come in, we will keep it. But other than that, we will not have communities. We must be individuals. Okay? Now, what happens to that is not only people's identities get changed, but there seems to be a human need for sociality. So my secretary, who is a leader of the teachers, of the clerical workers union at the university, listens to Rush Limbaugh every day. She despises him, but she has no one to talk to during the day. She's sitting at a damn computer every day answering the phones in this alienating thing where the 3 people who used to work with her in the office have been canned. Okay? So she, as I walk by or we're having lunch together, she's screaming at Rush. You'll forgive this. You asshole! How could you say this? Now that's actually very important. There's a form of sociality and interaction of talking back. And the right has occupied that space of community, of creating ways in which it knows what workplaces are like. There is no time for people to talk. Teachers have no time to pee. So given that, having this sort of formal, informal way of communicating with folks becomes crucial, and the media becomes absolutely central. So every 2 weeks now, or 1 month, depending on the schedule, I'm on regional NPR. It's about 3 million people in the Midwest in the United States, doing Apple does Rush Limbaugh without the feminazi bullshit. With a little anti-racist riff in there, etc. But the idea is, people are listening to talk radio. Why should the right colonize that space? So it's from 6 in the morning till 9 in the morning. It's about an hour to 3 hours, depending on the schedule. And what they do is, it's people calling up, saying, I got a story to tell. They speak for 5 minutes, and I'm supposed to sort of give the alternative in a way that says, even when I disagree with them, this is really interesting, say more. So it's an attempt to do public pedagogy, not in classrooms, not cynically manipulating the right, what they do, but understanding that the public space of conversation is where they are brilliant. So what we've done with the Critical Media Project is to try and reoccupy that space of talk radio, but also to do the other kinds of things. So an example would be this. The right is brilliant at op-ed pieces, really smart. And they're brilliant at doing the following kinds of things. When a right-wing report from the Fraser Institute here, or from the American Enterprise Institute, or the latest racist diatribe is coming out showing that black kids are just genetically inferior, right? And we know that indigenous kids, we don't even have to bother to measure because we already know the answer to that. Really horrible stuff. They have the report then written by professional journalists that they pay $100,000 yearly salary to. Okay? These are folks at the Enterprise Institute. They have media flax. We don't have $100,000 to pay all these folks. What we do have are other kinds of resources. So we have now gotten about 150 academics, union leaders, community organizers, etc. When a right-wing op-ed piece comes out, a right-wing document, a right-wing research report, or a letter to the editor in a local weekly shopper, we try and go down that low. Okay? One of us whose area it is, so neoliberalism and curriculum stuff, I get. Somebody who does evaluation, and it's stuff on why we need performance pay for teachers. Oh my God, welcome to the factory. So how many dresses did you sew today? Okay, you get $1 extra. That's the model. Right? When that stuff comes out, one of us gets it. We write a response. Okay? We now, at 2 universities, have told critical journalists, would you like a PhD? Your work for us, you'll do the regular coursework, take the exams, you get a legitimate PhD, which will help you. Your job for 50% as a research associate is to rewrite Michael Apple, rewrite these academics, so that it's in journalese in a way that gets powerful. So the idea is, what did the right do? They occupied the space. What can we learn from them? Not rhetorically about another quote from Paulo Freire, a dear friend of mine. I'm still in mourning about his death. It's not a horrible, that's not my point about doing in power. It's to understand that the right engages in public pedagogy, that's social. So the right's hit list, that is its publication rate, is about 77 to 79%. So when it writes this stuff, because it's got really talented writers rewriting this racist horror or more stuff on privatization, we now have to say, what are the resources we have? And our hit rate is 27 to 29%. That's 1/3 of theirs. If I remember from when I was teaching 6th grade and we did arithmetic, 0 is not as good as 27 to 29%. Okay? Now my point is to say we are so cynical right now that we forget that we actually, now our task is to criticize the folks. That is absolutely crucial. They are very, very dangerous. But we have to understand how smart they actually are. And we diminish our ability to talk back if we actually disrespect the brilliance of the people we disagree with. So as an example, the largest percentage of growth in homeschooling right now are African American parents in the United States. Well, I quote now, "You are killing my children. I'm taking my kid out of this school." I may disagree with homeschooling profoundly as a social movement, because it's social movements that change education. And the idea that individual parents making individual decisions will form a social movement is absolutely bizarre and ahistorical. But in the meantime, I have to understand why the right is able to organize this group. Black parents and indigenous parents are not stupid about what's happening to their kids. So how is it that the right is able to occupy this space? So part of the argument I want to make is let us actually be a little more respectful in a bizarre way. And I know this is a bit hot, just what's the word I'm looking for? Heretical. You know? But I'm not in a church, so I'm not worried about heresy. I want to say the right is really, really, really smart. What did they do? Let's study what they did. How do you convince people who are losing their jobs, African American people who are losing their jobs, women who are losing their jobs and being exploited? How do you get union people who are watching their union be destroyed vote for the right? Support the attacks on teachers. We either have to say, what a bunch of stupid people, which I think is exactly the wrong position, but to say in this heretical way, what can we learn from our enemies? And I mean that quite seriously. So I'll stop, but I want us to understand the Critical Media Project becomes our growing attempt to find a way, in response when you were talking in your question about decentered unities. There are people who disagree on race and class. There are people in that group who say we're spending too much time on sexuality. The real issue is class. I don't have a lot of patience with these arguments. But we have to find a way of saying the right is just like the left, it kills each other. They have agreed to form an alliance. It's about time we did the same thing. Okay, anyway, so I'll stop on that, okay?
I've said this before, but it's not an envious position to be in to tell either of these people to stop talking, because I think that they raise some very good issues, and I could sit here and watch them debate and riff on each other all night. But part of the spirit of tonight is that it's very participatory. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I invite you to speak to your neighbor or those around you and talk about the ideas that maybe they sparked in you or your own thoughts that you'd like to bring to this conversation. And then in about 20 minutes, we'll regather as a group and we can have some talk between and amongst each other. So talk, eat, enjoy each other's ideas, drink, difference, drink if you should choose to. There's lots of water. Water's still free too, so it's good.
Just reach.
Yeah, you have 20 minutes, so talk amongst yourselves.
So I'm it's not steady.
Is it a bit shaky there?
Yeah, your elbow. I was trying to tell you your elbow. Because it was on that napkin.
No, I kept pressing my phone to see what time.
Oh, I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah. CBC.